Hi, I'm Kristen, and today I'm going to show you how to make this simple 9-patch quilt in a week. So I started on the quilt top for this on a Thursday evening, and I finished the binding on the following Tuesday evening. So, and I wasn't working on it like the whole day, 24 hours in between. So this is an exercise, it's part of a new series called Quilt in a Week, which I'm really kind of doing for myself. I'm wanting to do more of these kind of projects that are not overcomplicated. I have a tendency to overcomplicate things. So I want to do some simple quilts to give myself the satisfaction of finishing more projects. And I feel like that's going to give me more of the kind of motivation and the mojo for those longer term projects. So whether that's you or whether you're a beginner and you're looking for something simple, this could be a great place to start. And I'm going to have variations in it. So although it looks like this is a complicated quilting design, it isn't. So first of all, I'm going to show you that. But also, if you don't want to do that, you can just simplify it and do straight line quilting or whatever you're comfortable with. So let's get started and I'll show you how to make it.
So this quilt is for a friend of mine who's just had a baby, but I like to make my baby quilts a little bit bigger. So this one measures 46.5 inches by 46.5 inches square. So it's like a large baby throw, I'm calling it. Kind of a comfort blanket that you can drag around the house and cuddle up on the sofa and maybe have on a toddler bed as well. So to make this quilt, you got to start with 2 charm packs. So charm packs are usually 42 5 by 5 inch squares. For once, I actually know the names of the fabrics. These are Janet Clare Wordsmith and Botanics or Botanicals. You just saw it there on the screen anyway. I am going to have a blog post that's got everything written down and linked to where I can. I think these were both from 2 separate like de-stash things. If you've watched my videos, you know how randomly I buy fabric. So the fact that I know the name of this stuff is amazing. Anyway, Janet Clare is one of those fabric designers that I actually know the name of. Anyway, the charm packs that I'm using and that would work for this is they need to have a kind of variety between light, medium, and dark fabrics, right? So the ones on the top there are light. I'm going to separate them out and show you, but that's how it's going to kind of work to sort of have a bit of interest in the quilt top. Now there's all sorts of tools you can use to decide what's medium and what's dark. And Karen Brown has a whole bunch of videos about how to do it with black and white photography. I don't do any of that. It's just an extra step for me, and it kind of sucks the joy out of it for me. That's just me. I know some people love to do that and they swear by it. That's totally fine. Go ahead and do that. But what I'm doing here is basically just putting things in a pile of what I think is light, medium, and dark. And it's just to my eye. It's the quilt I'm making. So it's kind of an exercise at going with your gut, I guess. So what I'm doing is for each of the packs, just separating them light, medium, and dark. And then I'm going to use that to make my 9 patches. So if you don't know what a 9 patch is what it sounds like. So it's basically 3 rows of 3 charm pack squares. I mean, it doesn't have to be, a 9 patch doesn't have to be the same size as these squares, but for the purposes of this, that's what it is. I always use my floor when I'm trying to decide how I'm going to make quilt blocks and quilt tops. So I basically put down some of the dark and medium fabrics and started making crosses. I wanted to emphasize the cross inside the 9 patch blocks. So I started trying to make them mostly with these kind of dark centers, but there weren't enough darks in the 2 packs. So then I made a couple of blocks with light center squares. And then filled the corners with the medium fabrics. So I had a mix of these dark crosses with light corners and then light crosses with sort of medium corners. And then I did end up with a random block that didn't quite fit just because of the distribution of what was in the charm pack. I sewed it together as a 9 patch, but I didn't use it in the end. The point is not to labor this. The point is just to come up with some groupings of 9 charm pack squares in order to create your quilt blocks. This is not the final layout of my quilt, and so you don't have to worry about the final layout of yours either. We're just picking 9 squares to go in the blocks. You are going to flip the middle squares of those blocks right sides down onto the left-hand side of your blocks, and then chain piece. So you're going to leave that third row of each of your blocks on the floor or wherever you're keeping track of your blocks, and you're going to just chain piece those all together. If you don't know what chain piecing is, it just means that you're going to sew through each pair of your charm pack squares over and over again without cutting your thread in between. It just makes it faster. So you go and snip the threads in between the pairs of charm pack squares at the end. When you've snipped apart those pairs of charm packs, just put them back where they were. It helps to take a photo so you don't lose your place and you still know what goes with what block. And then you are going to do the same again. So you're going to flip that third row of each block, right sides to right sides, onto the middle of your block, and then go back and chain sew again. And once you have done that, that's when we are going to press. So you're going to have rows of 3 blocks that are sewn together. And so you'll be, again, cutting apart the threads where you were chain piecing them. And then this is a personal choice, but I like to iron my seams open. I know some people like to do sort of one row in one direction and one in the other, but then you have to keep track of what row is what. And in order to get that nesting happening. So I prefer to just iron open all my seams, so then you can't go wrong in terms of that, and it's still the same amount of bulk in terms of sort of 2 layers on either side of your seam line there. So once you have all your pressed 3 rows of 3, then we're joining those rows to make our final blocks. So again, right sides to right sides, you're going to leave the bottom row where it is and put the top row onto the middle row first of all, and then the middle row to the bottom row once you do the next bit. So the main thing that you need to pay attention to, this is a simple block, but the bit that you need to make sure you're looking for is that those seam lines join up in the middle so that the rows look straight. So in order to do that, I use one of these clips, and I just take it slow over that join. Then you just repeat for the bottom row, and you should have 9 finished blocks. Now this is when I started playing around with the layout a bit and deciding which block goes where, and also deciding that I didn't like that one that just didn't have that dark and light contrast. So that one that's in the middle right there. I decided not to use that one in the end. So I played around with, could I put some fabric in the middle? Could I put some fabric in the corner, which is what I ended up doing. So I cut a 13.75 inch background square block and replaced that 9 patch that I didn't like. So it was also at this point that I decided on the layout. So I went for the kind of medium cross in the middle with the light ones either side, and then the darker ones on the top and the bottom. So Friday night was a slightly shorter session. I basically joined together the blocks where I decided the layout the night before. It's the same process as when you're making a 9 patch. You're doing right sides to right sides with the first 2 rows, making sure you're joining at those seam lines, and then repeating with the last column or row, however you want to call it. I then added a 4.5 inch border around the edge because, as I said, I like to make my baby quilts a bit bigger, but that's totally optional. If you want a standard size baby quilt, you don't need the border at all. If you need more measurements or more kind of step-by-step run through about making the 9 patches and joining the rows, there will be a link to a blog post in the description. So if you're a complete beginner, do check that out. So Saturday morning, basically all I did was baste the quilt. This is what I used for my backing. It's a secondhand duvet cover that I bought off eBay. I sometimes do that for quilt backs, and I thought this one kind of tied into the botanical theme. Saturday evening, I started quilting. So I used free motion quilting for this. I know some people, you mightn't have done that, and it might be a bit intimidating, so you can always use whatever quilting design you want, but I would like to show you kind of how easy this one can be. So this is a ruler foot on my Bernina machine. You can use any kind of free motion quilting foot, but I've gotten used to, for some reason, using the ruler foot even when I'm not using a ruler. There is a Bernina stitch regulator that's on my machine, but I don't find it all that useful. I might do a video about that another time. But anyways, the quilting design that I used for this quilt was just basically leaves. So you can see I'm just making random leaf shapes. I'm trying to make them quite large so that the quilting goes as quickly as it can. And I'm just kind of getting myself out of the kind of hole at the bottom and making another leaf to fill an empty space, and then pivoting the quilt a little bit, and then going off and starting another leaf. And they don't have to be exactly the same size, and they don't have to be perfect. This kind of design, because it's kind of organic and looks a bit like just leaves overgrowing something, it's very forgiving. So even if some of your leaves don't look like leaves, or you have to cross over lines, it's, unless someone's really staring at it, and people don't do that, no one's going to really notice. So it can have a really good, effective look without having to take too long. This is me trying to cram the quilt through the throat of my machine. Once you get yourself into a certain corner and you want to change direction, that's kind of how it goes. I know people are going to ask me, because they always ask me about the quilting gloves. They basically have little plastic nobules on the fingers, and it's just to help get a grip of the quilt and help you move it around, because you're meant to be sort of holding the fabric as close to the foot as you can there and holding it taut, and it's just easier to do with the gloves on. Without the gloves, I find myself pinching the quilt, like almost wanting to pick it up in sections, and that's not ideal. You can get the kind of back of it bunched up and stuff. Also, I didn't mention with the basting that I spray basted this one, so that I didn't have to stop and take out pins or micro stitch tacks or whatever. I do change my basting methods up all the time. I hate basting. I hate every method of basting. But when I'm doing free motion quilting, I usually do spray based so that I don't have to stop and take things out. So that's what I did for this one. So just continue around. You should start in the middle when you're doing any kind of quilting design, to not get puckers, but also so you don't kind of quilt yourself into a corner and stuff like that. So start in the middle and work your way out, and hopefully you can see here I'm just kind of trying to, so there I'm just trying to find a way out from those other leaves and make a new one. It's harder to see on the light background fabric there, but you can just keep making lots of organic leaves until you get to the edge. And obviously if you feel like this is too much, or you don't like that pattern, then it certainly would be quicker to do stitch in the ditch or straight lines, and you could get it done even quicker. So Sunday evening, I was still quilting. So I got quite far Saturday night, but I didn't quite finish it, so I had a few other bits around the edges to finish on Sunday evening, and I think maybe a little bit of Monday evening. So by Monday evening, I was taking less process photos for some reason. But anyways, I finished the quilting and I pieced my binding strips, which are these 2.5 inch gray strips you can see here. This is a photo from before it was quilted, obviously, and before the strips were pressed. But anyways, I used gray 2.5 inch strips to make the binding. So Tuesday evening, I bound the quilt. So I use a machine binding method that I learned from Melanie Ham. I'll link to it in the description. And I also sat and hand sewed on this label. The label was actually, the letters on the label were actually made using my Bernina, the alphabet stitch, but I hand sewed the actual label onto the back of the quilt. So that took the rest of Tuesday evening. Although I made the quilt, this is a joint present from me and my friend Liz to our other friend Ali. Liz is going to pay for the postage from the UK to Canada. So by the next day, Wednesday, it was washed and drying on the line and ready to be posted not long after that. So that to me is a quilt in a week, and I did really get the satisfaction of having it finished so quickly. And I do find that it's the easier ones that I tend to like the best. When I belabor them and take too long and think about it too much, it doesn't always come out as well. So I hope you'll try a simple quilt like this, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the next Quilt in a Week installment.
I hope you like this video. If you do, then please do subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, leave me a comment, let me know what you thought, and thanks so much for spending time with me.